Hello and welcome friends. Today in this lecture we are going to discuss basically multicultural or multiculturalism and the way they try to renegotiate or re-theorize the liberal notion of citizenship as individual being a self-defining subject, and therefore they carry certain rights as a citizen to a political community. In the multicultural or communitarian notion of citizenship, we will see how they try to re-theorize or renegotiate with this liberal conception of citizenship as individual being the right bearing citizenship, and that rights is given to the individual not because he or she is a member to a particular community, but he or she is a self defining rational subject. So, we will see it in the multicultural debates on citizenship and how they try to negotiate with the liberal conceptualization of citizenship. Then in the second part of our lecture today, we will focus on the cosmopolitan notion of citizenship, where there is a vagueness. The practice of citizenship is not very much in accordance with the cosmopolitan citizenship. However, the ideals of citizenship remains a very powerful ideal and therefore worth considering when we discuss about the notion of citizenship, and then we will conclude today's lecture. So, to begin with, the contemporary debates on citizenship have questioned the idea that citizen can enjoy rights independent of their context, and this context of individual, which can be social, cultural, linguistic, economic, determines a lot of changes or a lot of scopes that individual may be able to enjoy in his or her life. So, the multicultural or the contemporary debates on citizenship question the premise of theory which believes that citizenship or citizenship rights can be enjoyed by the individual independent of his context, whether it is social, cultural, economic or linguistic. So, debates over multiculturalism, differences, plurality and diversity have significantly opened up many contestations in theories of citizenship. So, they argue that citizen as an individual is also a member to a particular community, and therefore, when we guarantee, when we give some rights to that individual, we also need to take into account the social, cultural, economic and the linguistic backgrounds of the citizenship, which actually determines the way that individual exercise his or her citizenship rights. So, this new debates about individual being member to a political community, but also to a social, cultural, ethnic, linguistic community, which determines, which shapes his values, which shapes his behavior and opinion about politics and so on. So, therefore, while we give some rights to the individual, we also need to take into account these social, cultural, linguistic backgrounds of the individual, which is something very crucial in actual exercise of citizenship rights of the individual. If you remember the liberal notion of citizenship, there is this understanding of individual as an abstract self-defining individual, and his or her context really do not matter in his exercise of citizenship rights. Now, the multicultural theorists try to renegotiate, re-theorize such notions of individuals and citizenship. Basically, the multicultural discourse on rights cherishes the cultural diversity and envisages a society in which different communities can form a common identity while retaining their cultural specificity. So, the multicultural argument is that we should not homogenize the cultural diversities or plurality of a society. Rather, we need to celebrate those diversity and plurality which help in developing a more enriching experiences or understanding of politics, identity, recognition, respect and so on. So it envisages a society which celebrate the cultural diversity and plurality, where different communities can come together to form a common identity or a society which has some common outlook, and yet it permits differences or the cultural specificities of different communities. So in other words, one need not to lose or forego one's cultural, linguistic or ethnic identity in order to participate as a free and equal member in the political community. So, here the multicultural or the communitarian argument is about the celebration of diversities and cultural specificities, which helps or enriches the participation or the making of a common identity for the society as a whole, where one participate in the collective affairs, but participate also as a member of his or her particular cultural, ethnic or linguistic community. So, there are growing interest in redefining citizenship by giving due importance to the cultural differences, and this is done by striking a balance between the numerous identities like religious, cultural, linguistic, while constructing a common political identity for the citizen of nation. So, in the multicultural discourse, the idea is how to celebrate or recognize the cultural differences even when we are aspiring or we are trying to create a common political identity, and how that can be done. This is something which we will discuss in a later part of this lecture, particularly when we focus on Iris Marion Young or Will Kymlicka. So, in the debates over citizenship in contemporary times, the ideas like multiculturalism and minority rights are invoked as democratic value, whereby diverse cultural communities are granted the right to negotiate or renegotiate their fair terms of inclusion in the national political sphere. So, this kind of debate in citizenship discourse open up a new ways of theorizing citizenship, where different communities, particularly those who are different or minority, it gives them the scope to negotiate their terms of inclusion in the larger political society. So, in order to individual from a minority community or a marginal community or a different cultural ethnic community to participate in a free and equal manner, need not to be based on his foregoing his cultural specificities or ethnic specificities and so on. So, the multicultural discourse on citizenship opens up those debates and discourses where these communities tries to participate in the political sphere or the national political sphere by renegotiating the terms of their inclusion in the larger community. So, the idea of differentiated citizenship was put forth by many theorists who thought that the idea of common rights, that is universal and uniformly given to every single member of the community, could not accommodate the specific or the particular needs of a large number of ethnic, religious and linguistic communities who are excluded or who feel excluded or marginalized by the mainstream society. So, the theorists who argue for differentiated citizenship believes that the idea of common rights or uniform rights that should be made available to every single member of the community is not enough, because it cannot accommodate the particular or the specific needs of different different ethnic, religious or linguistic communities, particularly of those who are from the marginal or the minority community, and their needs, their specificities require a notion of citizenship which take into account their differences, their distinctiveness, and yet allow them to participate in the common affairs of the society. So, they argue that different groups can be accommodated into common citizenship only by adopting what Iris Marion Young called differentiated citizenship. So, this idea of differentiated citizenship is put forth by the Iris Marion Young, who believes that the different communities, different linguistic, cultural, ethnic communities requires different kind of recognition, and in national politics such considerations needs to be taken into account while granting citizenship rights to different individuals, to different communities, and there the specificities and particularities of different communities needs to be taken into account, and you cannot just have a kind of liberal, equal or uniform rights that is given to everyone. So, the needs of the particular community is something which they argue. So, the notion of differentiated citizenship means that members of certain groups should be accommodated not only as individuals, but also through their memberships, and their rights would partially depend upon their group membership. So, this idea of group differentiated citizenship is based on the assumption that certain rights should be given to individual not because he or she is individual independent of his socio-cultural linguistic backgrounds, but also because he or she belongs to a particular linguistic, socio-ethnic or cultural community. So, differentiated citizenship argues for differentiated rights depending upon the individual membership to a particular groups or ethnic communities. So, Young argues that a society where some groups are privileged while others are oppressed, persons should leave behind their particular affiliations and adopt a general view while insisting all as citizens. So, these oppressions or subordinations is something which is detrimental for developing a common outlook or to have same sense of participation or association with the larger community. So, to develop that outlook, one needs to also forego or leave behind the particular affiliation and adopt a general view. However, that adoption should not privilege one community over the other or oppress one community by the other. Now, further on from this discourse on differentiated citizenship, we have Will Kymlicka, where he argues about different ways in which the cultural or the ethnic diversities in the communities can be reconciled. So, seeking to redefine the principle of equality and make it compatible with multiculturalism, Will Kymlicka provides a framework of representation and membership that accommodates cultural and group differences in a way that a person's group membership and membership in a cultural community is not of any disadvantage to her. So, Will Kymlicka is here basically trying to provide a mechanism of representation where the membership of one's cultural communities or group membership is not seen as a kind of disadvantage to the individual. So, for example, in a society which is a liberal society and do not acknowledge any kind of privilege that is associated to one's belongingness to a particular community, may in practice, practically speaking, still leave a scope for oppression and privilege that is associated with a particular community in the nation state. So, Will Kymlicka is trying to provide a mechanism where there is the possibility of making representation fair for everyone, and the membership to one's cultural, linguistic or ethnic community is not seen or should not work as a detriment or a kind of disadvantage to one's scope and to one's chance in participating in the common life of the community. So, according to Will Kymlicka, the demands of national minorities and ethnic groups can be accommodated within a framework of democratic citizenship. So, they are basically extending the notion of liberal democratic citizenship by including or by accommodating the demands or the requirements of the specific cultural, linguistic or ethnic communities. So, one, this accommodation of difference can be done within the framework of a liberal democratic citizenship by two ways. One, there should be protection of common rights of all citizens, that is protection of civil and political rights of individuals, freedom of associations, religion, speech and mobility for protecting group differences. So, one way of doing or accommodating such differences is by protecting the common rights of every citizens to have civil and political rights, freedom of association, religion, speech and mobility, so that they can protect their differences or group differences. Then second, there should be accommodation of cultural diversity. So, the cultural diversity here is not something which is seen as a kind of problem or a challenge, rather it is seen as something which enriches the lives of the citizen and must be protected and celebrated. So, there should be accommodation of cultural diversity through special legal and constitutional measures in a way that member of a specific groups being guaranteed specific rights, as Young would call them, group differentiated rights. So, these measures require some constitutional measures where the member of a particular communities, especially those who are marginal or excluded or in minority, some constitutional measures for them to have special representation that overall creates the representation fair for everyone within the democratic setup, democratic framework of citizenship. Now, Kymlicka argues for three kinds of group differentiated rights. One is self-government rights, polyethnic rights and then special representation rights. Now, these three kinds of constitutional measures or rights are given to three kinds of communities or groups in the society. So, first is the self-representation rights, which recognize some kind of political autonomy or territorial jurisdiction of national minorities. So, for example, within Canada, you have a province or Quebec which demands for greater autonomy or some kind of territorial autonomy to take decisions about their collective affairs within the federal structure of Canada. There, Will Kymlicka is arguing about for this kind of national minorities, there has to be some kind of self-government rights which ensures their autonomy within the overall political structure in the country. So, these national minorities claim that their inclusion or incorporation in the larger state, while it was being done, they did not relinquish their specific cultural, social, linguistic specificities or identities, and therefore, they demand for the self-government rights. So, basically the self-government rights are meant for the national minorities who claim that while they were incorporated in the larger state, they did not relinquish some of their political or cultural linguistic identities or jurisdiction, and therefore, the state must recognize the self-government rights of these national minorities. Then there is polyethnic rights, and these are specific rights of immigrant communities, basically in the large liberal democracies in Europe or in US, you have a number of immigrant communities from different parts of the world. They carry certain culture, certain language, certain way of living, certain way of dressing and so on. So, these polyethnic rights are meant for the specific rights of immigrant communities, and such rights may take the form of demanding the right to express their peculiarities and differences without fear of prejudice and discrimination in the mainstream society. So, what to wear, where to pray, whom to marry, what to eat, which language one should speak. So, these are some of the demands which must be protected in a liberal state, especially for those communities which are immigrant communities in a particular nation, and they must express themselves or their way of life or their language or living style without being feared or stigmatized by the large mainstream society. So, polyethnic rights recognize the specific rights or peculiarities or differences of immigrant communities in the larger democratic society. Now, the special representation rights are third kind of rights which are meant for national and ethnic groups as well as for non-ethnic groups such as women, poor and disabled. These special representation rights are basically to democratize the state institution structures by making them more representative. So, the state structure even when it is neutral may lead to some kind of exclusion or marginalization of certain section of the society. So, to ensure the fair representation, Will Kymlicka argues for special representation rights for national and ethnic groups, but also non-ethnic groups such as women, poor and disabled to make the state institutions and structure of administration more representative in nature. So, multicultural theory of citizenship has altered the way in which the political communities are thought of. So, usually political communities are thought of as a homogeneous group. So, far for being a homogeneous group, the political community is in multicultural discourse and is seen as a heterogeneous group of communities having different cultures, language, ethnicity and associated differences and peculiarity and so on, and yet they all together enriches the experiences of individuals in the society, and therefore that must be protected and celebrated, which leads to expansion or inclusiveness of a liberal democratic framework of citizenship. However, multiculturalism runs into danger of denying the individual the right of critical and creative membership in the communities and overlook the hierarchies and operations that communities practice and promote within. So, one of the criticism that is there with against multiculturalism is that it denies the individual his critical or creative membership by overlooking the hierarchies or operations that may exist or that may be promoted or practiced in the communities within. So, in recognizing or accommodating the demands or requirements of different communities, it appears that multicultural theorists overlook the hierarchies or some inner undemocratic practices within the community which prevents the individual his creative or critical rights or membership, and it appears that individual is subordinated to the identity of the community, and that is one of the biggest criticism against the multicultural theories of citizenship, which somehow subordinate the rights of individual to that of communities. The another criticism leveled against multiculturalism is that by acknowledging the community's power to apply internal restraints, it leaves little scope for individual rights and freedom, and it appears that within minority or marginalized communities, rights of individuals are somewhat dispensable with in comparison to the rights and recognition of their communities. So, as I have said that multicultural theorists argue for granting certain rights to individual not because the individual is a self-defining abstract individual, but because individual is also embedded in his socio-cultural, ethnic and linguistic community, and therefore, certain rights to the individual must be given not because he is abstract or atomistic self-defining individual, but because he is also a member to a particular community, and thereby it appears that in recognition of community rights or group differentiated rights, the rights of individual and his freedom is somewhat compromised in the multicultural discourse, and overall they tries to expand the liberal democratic framework, yet they fail somewhat to understand the inner constraints or operations that operates and functions within these communities, and how to reconcile that with the liberal ideal of citizenship and rights is something which is problematic in the multicultural theories. However, they tries to expand this limited or narrow understanding of individual as self-defining individual or community as a homogeneous community in the liberal framework to a understanding of community which is heterogeneous, which includes different communities having different culture, ethnicity, language and so on, and society while developing the common outlook must recognize and protect those diversities and pluralities. That is something which is a contribution of multiculturalism in citizenship discourse. Now, we will move on to the cosmopolitan notion of citizenship, which as I said is something not practiced as we see the membership to a particular political community or a nation state. So, in reality cosmopolitanism or cosmopolitan citizenship is far from practical or pragmatic, and yet as an ideal, as a thought experiment, it is something which we must consider or engage with. So, this idea of cosmopolitanism is derived from the Greek word cosmopolites, which means citizen of the world, and Diogenes is regarded as the first cosmopolitan philosopher who asserted that I am a citizen of the world. Now, this idea, you know that the citizenship is about membership to a political community. Now, the world is divided into different nation states, and this nation state is for all practical purpose is the legitimate political organization and institution, and citizenship is seen in association with the membership to a particular nation state or a particular political community. However, the cosmopolitan citizenship tries to transcend the boundaries of nation states to develop a sensibilities, to develop the obligation towards world as a whole, and not because not limited to a particular nation state or a political communities. And this you can often seen, say, as a citizen of India or as a citizen of Pakistan or a citizen of Bangladesh, our sensibilities, loyalties and obligations are limited to territorial boundaries of, say, India, Pakistan or Bangladesh. But when we develop the sensibilities and obligation or loyalties towards world, our response or our association will then not be defined and limited to the territorial boundary of any of these states. So, because we consider ourselves and imagine ourselves not as a member of a particular political community, but to the larger community of humanity or human ideals as such. Now, this ideal was there from the very beginning, but in modern contemporary times with the coming of globalization, theorists have also talked about the linking of relationship between citizenship and nation state and argue for replacing it with global or cosmopolitan citizenship with universal human community. So, the community to which one belongs is not limited to the nation state, but to a universal human community, and that becomes the ideal for the cosmopolitan notion of citizenship. According to Derek Heiter, although cosmopolitan citizenship is undefinable, so when I say India, Pakistan or Bangladesh, there is a clear cut exact imagery both in the territorial or also in the political sense, but the world or the cosmopolitan citizenship leads one in the realm of vagueness, where you are not exact about the legal or the political status of your membership as it is in the case of your membership to a particular nation state or the political community. So, according to Derek Heiter, although cosmopolitan citizenship is undefinable in theory and non-existent in practice, as an ideal it is worth considering. It lacks legal and political exactness, as I have explained. However, its understanding ranges from vague to precise, and this we will do to these 3-4 ways of being a cosmopolitan citizenship. So, A, people who have a feeling of identity with the whole of humanity are regarded as world or cosmopolitan citizens. So, there are individuals in the society who feel or associate themselves with the whole humanity and not just to the members of their own particular nation states. They are regarded as a cosmopolitan citizen. B, cosmopolitan citizens accept the moral percept that the individual has some responsibility for the condition of the planet and the rest of its inhabitants. So, they develop the sensibility that their obligation is not just limited to a particular nation state and its territory, but it extends to the whole of humanities and the other inhabitants in that humanities as well. So, they work or operates in this moral percept which transcend the boundaries of the nation state. So, then C, a cosmopolitan citizen came to live or abide by the codes of supra or transnational laws and possibly by universal and international laws. So, in modern world you also see the international regimes of institutions, laws, codes and framework through which all the nation state operates, and there is also the gradual development of supranational bodies such as European Union, ASEAN, even in South Asia we have SAARC, but it is not politically as successful as say European Union or ASEAN. So, the cosmopolitan citizen develop a outlook which operates and functions within the codes of these supra or transnational laws and possibly universal and international laws. Then finally, a cosmopolitan citizen believes in and work for supranational universal political community and authority. So, they develop the concept of human rights or democracy or democratic rights of the citizen, the access to the basic health care, Universal Declaration of Human Rights is one such example, where every member of the planet is treated as a human and therefore having certain rights which must be protected or guaranteed by the political authorities. So, the cosmopolitan citizenship believes and work for developing this global communities or universal community of people where the understanding, the codes and laws are not limited to the national boundaries. So, we have seen that from the vague understanding of developing a sensibility for the world or for the planet to working for a more concrete or pragmatic creation of political authority or universal community is the evolution of cosmopolitan thinking and imagination in modern times. However, there are genuine criticism leveled against the cosmopolitan notion of citizenship, and there are many skeptics who argue that such notion of citizenship in the absence of exact legal and political status are merely utopia. So, there are many skeptics who argue that the cosmopolitan citizenship is merely utopia because it lacks the exact legal or political status, as we see that when we claim to be the citizen of India or Bangladesh or United Kingdom or USA, there is the exact rights or obligations associated with the membership to that particular community. But when you claim to be the member of the global community or a cosmopolitan citizen, those precise understanding of your legal and political status is not there, and therefore many skeptics argue that cosmopolitan citizenship and this discourse is merely utopia because it lacks exact legal and political definition. And many others view that cosmopolitan citizenship is nothing but a facets of globalization which is extension of capitalism driven largely by the MNCs and TNCs, that is multinational corporation or transnational corporation, because they want free flow of capital and goods. Therefore, they want to create a global network of institutions and authority which helps in the free flow of ideas, peoples, goods and capital. So, many skeptics argue that cosmopolitan notion of citizenship is nothing but a facets of globalization which itself is an extension of capitalism which is driven largely by the multinational corporations or transnational corporations. Now, still others associate cosmopolitan citizenship with a privileged class which emerge in many nation states who happen to cross national boundaries very often and aspire for creating some kind of global community. So, this notion of cosmopolitan citizenship is meant only for this privileged class which is beneficiary of this globalization, who often transcend the national boundaries, and then they aspire to create some kind of global community. So, many critics still believe that most people live or operates within the framework of nation states, but then there is a privileged section which often transcend those boundaries of nation states, and therefore they aspire to create the global community, and that is limited to them. Largely people live and abide by the national boundary. So, there are the genuine criticism against the cosmopolitan notion of citizenship. So, although it is true that cosmopolitan citizenship is far from being real or pragmatic or practical, yet even its critique would argue or acknowledge the necessity of creation of a global society to which each one of us has obligation to. So, even these critics and skeptics would argue that there is a need to create some kind of global society or community to which each one of us has obligation to, and the nation states is not ultimate or the sufficient for tackling many of the challenges of the modern contemporary world. So, there are many challenges before humanity, such as climate change or terrorism or global terrorism, which requires people and communities to come together in order to solve it. So, these challenges of climate change or global terrorism cannot be tackled by a particular country or a single country, no matter how much economically and militarily powerful that country is. The challenge of climate change or global terrorism requires people, communities or nations to come together to solve it, and that connects the individual with the local, with the national to the global, or vice versa. So, this flow of or connection of individual with the global or the cosmopolitan is something which is the need of the hour to tackle many of the challenges, and therefore, even when the cosmopolitan citizenship and its notion lacks a precise legal and political definition or status, yet as an ideal it is something which is worth considering. And with that we come to conclude this lecture by repeating some of the points. So, basically the significance of contemporary debates on citizenship lies in the fact that the political community is not homogeneous, not simple, but it is a complex, hierarchical and ideologically plural. And therefore, when we develop the notion of citizenship, we need to take into account these complex, hierarchical or ideologically plural nature of the political community, and in absence of such understanding, the notion of citizenship will always be limited or partial. So, the significance accorded to the contextualized self, or which you can often call embedded self, too is crucial in building substantive notion of citizenship, where citizen is not just individual as self defining, but also because individual is a member to a particular ethnic, cultural, linguistic community which shapes his views, values, behavior, outlook and so on. So, the idea of individual as a part of the community bound to other individuals not by necessity or private interest, but by community or social concern is an important aspect of this formulation, as we have discussed in the multicultural notion of citizenship or differentiated citizenship as argued by Iris Marion Young. So, citizenship, to understand it, we has four components which we need to take into account. First is the rights, then obligation, then identity and then participation. So, citizenship includes these all four components. So, your membership to a particular community gives you certain rights. It also requires certain obligation from you. So, as a member of a particular nation state, you have certain rights, but you also have certain obligation to that nation states and so on. It gives you an identity. So, once you belong to a particular nation state, that belonging to a particular nation state gives you a legal and political identity within the country and outside, where you are treated as the Indian or Pakistani or Bangladeshi or British and so on. And finally, it gives you the right to participate in the political process in a particular community or a nation state. So, on the basis of these four key components, one can understand and explain different conceptualization of citizenship, whether it is definition by T. H. Marshall or by the multiculturalist or the cosmopolitan. By these four components of citizenship, one can understand these conceptualization. So, this we have studied through different notions of citizenship, such as subject and citizen. If you remember the first lecture, where we tried to understand citizenship by distinguishing it from, say, subject or understanding of subject, the idea of single or double citizenship. Then we did T. H. Marshall and liberal conceptions of citizenship, and finally multicultural and cosmopolitan citizenship. So, this is all on today's lecture on citizenship, particularly the multicultural or the cosmopolitan citizenship, and for that you can refer to some of these books by Drazak and Phillips, the Oxford Handbook of Political Theory, this chapter by Anupama Roy, Citizenship in Rajiv Bhargav and Ashok Acharya, will give you a better understanding of some of the topics that we have covered within the citizenship. You can also refer to John Hoffman and Paul Graham, Introduction to Political Theory, and then Gauba and Susila Ramaswamy. You can refer to understand some of the themes that we have discussed in citizenship. So, that is all for today. Thanks for listening. Thank you all.